in preparing this lesson, took a completely different turn than what I was originally intended. It surprised me of what direction I'm going. It may not have a whole lot to do with the title, but I put the title out, so I felt like I had to use it. But in a way, it really does. And I'm probably teaching this. It's probably not my style, what I'm teaching. And you'll know what I mean perhaps later. And that is that we're beginning this lesson. This lesson's in two parts. And the first thing is that we're going to look at Nehemiah chapter 3 at the gates of the city. And they are listed here, the gates that were, who worked on them, and the names of the gates, what order they were in. And I know that sounds really fun, but we're not going to talk about the specifics of that so much. But the significance that the gates are named and they're in a certain order. And we're going to talk about that in relation to the church, which is a type of, Jerusalem is a type of in some ways. And then we're going to go all the way over to Nehemiah chapter 8. And we're going to talk about spiritual renewal for just a moment. This is all kind of spiritual stuff tonight. But anyway, I thought my whole lesson was going to be on spiritual renewal, Nehemiah 8. And the point that I really want to make, and I'll make it at the beginning, is that, hey, Brother Hughes, if you could get me a cup of that in his name, you'll not lose your reward. Thank you, sir. Thank you. I appreciate it. Something's got me here by the throat. What I saw as absolutely, I had made a list on my computer. I don't even haven't printed it out of Nehemiah and the people had been through in the first 7 chapters of Nehemiah. And it was astounding, not only the responsibilities of building the wall, of the organization of it, but they had the enemy pressing them. And they were fearful. A couple times the people were absolutely fearful. And to think they had to put night watch up. Every family was provided weapons. I mean, this was an intense time for about 2 months. I know the wall was 2 months, 60 days, 52 days. But for 2 months, they lived on guard every minute of the day and night. And they had the responsibility of working all the time, guarding all the time. The pressure that they were under. It's no wonder that the book of Nehemiah is loaded with prayers. And because sometimes when life is like that, that is our answer. And it's let's get with God. But this 8th chapter, when all this pressure was off, Sanballat and Tobiah were no longer a threat. The walls were up. The gates were up. All this work was done. What the people needed was they needed worship. They needed time with God. And it so happened the Feast of the Tabernacles, 8th chapter, Ezra reads the word of the Lord. And they had an entire week of the Feast of the Tabernacles, in which, if we say it was a time of spiritual renewal, and it really was for the people. And one thing that I worry about is a very real thing, and I'm talking really, this is where the rubber meets the road. In all of us, when we are in service, the service of the Lord, where everybody sits back in church, I mean, not everybody, but some, with no responsibility. They come to be whatever they come to be, entertained or blessed, or that's all they think about. They're not thinking about blessing anybody else or being a blessing. They want the blessing of the Lord. I'm going to tell you what, we all know, I'm not speaking critically, I'm just saying the way it is, but we all need the blessing of the Lord, and we know that. But to me, it's really hard to get the point across to somebody unless they've been there and they know. There's no greater blessing than being involved in God's work and in His kingdom. That's where you're really blessed. And we become closest to the people we work with. Okay, so that's the way to really say, I want to get involved in church. Well, then get involved in church. And I don't know what you mean, but really that usually means sacrifice and work. I'm right. And yet at the same time, Spencer, somebody can sit up and be faithful up in the crow's nest up there, either the sound or the video or all that, and they can lose their soul. You say, I'm in church, but you're just working. And we have to get to the point of worship. It can happen in the musicians. It can happen with the singers, where we get so concerned about the work that we forget about the worship. And I can do that. I worry about preaching. I worry about teaching. I worry about my subject matter. And I have to discipline myself. I've felt bad. I think it wasn't last. Maybe it was the last 2 Sunday mornings, but last Sunday morning, maybe it was Sunday morning. Did you preach last Sunday morning?
No, I did. No.
You did, so it was Sunday night. I came in and I think I went on the platform and I was opening my Bible and trying to, thank you. See, I knew I distracted somebody. I was trying to get my stuff together. And you know what? It's important to get my stuff together. I'd rather be together before church started, whatever time. But I don't like to do that. And I knew. And for me to try to study and worship at the same time and do that under a pressure situation is not good. And I've realized, oh God, I'm just making a mess out of them. I'd love to just put my stuff down, forget about it till it was time to get up. Sometimes I can't do that. But what I realized, and I apologize for this, is if I didn't have it ready, I shouldn't have been out there. I should have been off to the back room there or front row or something, and kind of so not to be a distraction from anybody else's worship. My goal is when I walk into church, no matter what my responsibility is, I worship just like everybody else. I mean, that's my goal because I need that connection with God. I really do. I preached several years ago, and the first time I think on a psalm where it's a psalm in preparation for the worship on the Sabbath day or whatever in the temple. Lift up your hands, O ye servants of the Lord, in the sanctuary, and bless His name. The servants, it was to the Levites that would have to work in the nighttime hours. The worship was over. They had to clean out the ashes. They had to rekindle the candlesticks. They had to do everything. It was mundane. It was like janitorial work that they had to do at night. And yet the psalmist was saying, and what they would do is as they were leaving the day of worship and closing the worship at the evening's time after the evening sacrifice, they would sing that psalm to the Levites who had to stay there. They weren't a part of the great majestic celebrations of the day. They didn't hear the choirs. They didn't hear the orchestra I'm talking about in Davidic times and Solomon times, where all these things accompanied the worship. They were there when everybody was gone and everybody else was asleep. They had to clean up the altar. They had to rekindle the oil in the candlesticks. They had to make sure everything was placed and clean and ready for the next time. And so they said, lift up your hands and bless the Lord in the sanctuary. Ye servants of the Lord at night, or something like that. And it was like, you know what? There's some times where we're so busy working for God that we forget who we're working for and why we're doing what we're doing. And it becomes very important that who we are working for is always more important than the work we're doing. Right? And in our own selves, because Be not weary in well-doing, for in due season you shall reap if you faint not. And it becomes ushers, nursery attendants, Sunday school teachers, pastors, musicians. I mean, everybody can feel stress, and we can feel pressure, and we can feel that. And when we do, it's time to take a step back. And it's time to remember this is all about Him. And we must do it heartily as unto the Lord and not unto men. It's men that put us under pressure. You know that? God doesn't put us under pressure. It's men. This has to look right. This has to be right. You know, we can become so, you know, and I'm not against organization. Nehemiah has organization, but we can worry about the task so much. And honestly, when I am worried so much about the task, I'm worried about what you think. I'm not worried about what God thinks. God's never put me under that kind of pressure. Am I right? So anyway, the great thing about the 8th chapter was time for spiritual renewal. The work was done. People need refreshed. I used to, in times like youth camps, when I had to do youth camps, I would build up the intensity of that. It would be built up, be under the pressure for a couple weeks. I mean, before obviously planning, going through all this, and then you have it, and it's all finished, and I'm exhausted, physically, spiritually. Good things happened. We rejoiced about it. But in all honesty, I never wanted to see the campgrounds again. I didn't want to talk to anybody. Honestly, I was done. I had been drugged through the mud. I was exhausted in every possible way. It's almost like Elijah coming down from Mount Carmel and going to the juniper tree and saying, just take my life, Lord. Over the threat of one woman. Of course, the only threat of the woman that I had was her. But anyway, yeah, absolutely. But anyway, I just, it's kind of like that. And I can make it the greatest victory of his ministry, Brother Hughes. 450 prophets of Baal, prophets of Ashtoreth, which that going to come to 800, I think. And all of this, the victory. The Lord, He is God. The Lord has got everything He possibly wanted on Mount Carmel. And yet He left as a defeated man. We're all just human, you know. We're all just dealing with flesh, and you can't. We have to. I know we have to put God first, and putting God first is sometimes me saying, you know what, my focus is wrong. It's not what we're doing is wrong, but our focus becomes wrong. And even Jesus had to take some days off.